When my family chose my cheating ex over me, I sold my successful business and watched them plead for help as they lost everything. I never thought the people who raised me would turn their backs on me so easily. But when my family sided with my cheating ex, I realized blood didn't mean loyalty. I built my own company from the ground up, worked late nights, sacrificed sleep, and poured my heart into making it successful. Yet, when the truth about my ex came out, that he had betrayed me, humiliated me, they acted like I was the problem. They told me to forgive and move on. But how do you move on when the people closest to you betray you just as much? At first, I begged them to see my side, to understand the pain I was in. But they only cared about keeping things peaceful, even if it meant erasing my feelings. That's when I made the hardest yet most freeing decision of my life. I walked away. And not just from them but from everything I had built. If they wanted to stand by him, they could do it without my help. I sold my business, took my money and disappeared. They thought I was being dramatic. But they had no idea the storm that was coming. And soon they'd be the ones begging me for mercy. At first, they didn't notice I was gone. Or maybe they thought I'd come crawling back, desperate for their approval. But I was done waiting for them to love me the way I deserved. I packed my things, signed the papers to sell my company, and left without looking back. The weight I had carried for years, trying to please them, trying to be the good child, was finally lifted. And for the first time in a long time I felt free. My phone buzzed constantly in the beginning. My mom left long, guilt-tripping voicemails about how family comes first. My dad sent short, emotionless texts, probably expecting me to fall back in line. My siblings, the ones I thought would at least try to understand, either stayed silent or sided with them. And my ex? He acted like he had one. Like he had taken not just my family but my entire life away from me. But what none of them realized was that I had built that life on my own. My business was my own creation, my success was my own effort. And if I could do it once, I could do it again. So I disappeared. I moved to another city, bought myself a place I actually liked. And for the first time, I lived without trying to prove myself to anyone. No more exhausting family gatherings where I had to pretend I wasn't hurting. No more forced smiles when my ex walked into the room like he hadn't shattered my trust. I thought I was done with them. But life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. Months passed, and the silence from my family grew louder. I wasn't reaching out, wasn't sending money, wasn't fixing their problems like I used to. And soon cracks started forming in their perfect little world. The first call came from my younger brother. He was the one I was closest to growing up, the only one who ever really listened when I talked. But even he had chosen to stay neutral when everything went down. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant. "I know we haven't talked in a while, but things are bad here." I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. "Mom and Dad, they're struggling. They thought you'd change your mind about everything, but when you sold the business, things got worse. They kinda relied on your success more than they let on." I almost laughed at the irony. When I was still around, they acted like my success didn't matter. My work was never as important as family obligations. But now that I was gone, they suddenly realized how much they had taken from me. I stayed quiet, letting him fill in the details. Turns out, my parents had been living well beyond their means. They had used me as a safety net for years, never worrying about finances because they assumed I would always be there to bail them out. When I cut myself off, they kept spending, believing I would eventually return. But I didn't. And then came the next hit. They had trusted my ex. After everything he had done to me, they still believed in him. He had convinced them he could help with their financial struggles, that he had the connections and the skills to turn things around. They handed over what little savings they had left, and he promised them results. And then, just like he had done to me, he betrayed them. The money was gone. Their investments vanished. And my family, the same people who had turned their backs on me, were now the ones drowning. I let out a slow breath, my grip tightening on my phone. It would be so easy to say, "I told you so," so easy to remind them that they had chosen him over me, that they had made their choice and now they had to live with it. But instead I asked, "So what do you want from me?" There was a long pause. Then, barely above a whisper, my brother said, "They need help." I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. Help. The same help I had begged for when I was shattered and alone. The same help they refused to give me because keeping the peace was more important than my pain. And now they expected me to fix everything. I didn't give him an answer. Instead, I told him I'd think about it and hung up. For the next few days, I sat with everything. The betrayal, the pain, the irony of it all. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, to prove that I wasn't like them, that I wouldn't turn my back on family the way they had on me. But another part of me, the part that had spent nights crying, the part that had been tossed aside so easily, wanted them to feel exactly what I had felt. Alone. Abandoned. Replaceable. A week later, my mom called. This time, she wasn't guilt-tripping me. She wasn't lecturing me about family unity or trying to convince me I was overreacting. She was crying. "We lost the house," she choked out. We have nowhere to go." The house. The same house I had grown up in. The place where I had spent my childhood believing family meant something. Gone. She told me about the debt collectors, the unpaid bills, the way they had reached out to every relative, every friend, and no one could help them. I don't know what to do, she whispered. And for the first time she sounded like she really truly meant it. I took a deep breath, staring out the window of my new home. The life I had built without them. I could help them. I could save them just like they expected me to. Or, I could do nothing. And for the first time they would have to face the consequences of their own choices. I didn't answer right away. I let my mother's words hang in the air. Let the silence stretch long enough for her to realize I wasn't rushing to save them. A year ago I would have dropped everything to fix their problems. A year ago I would have told myself that no matter what, family comes first. But now? Now I wasn't so sure. She sniffled on the other end, waiting, probably expecting me to jump in with a solution. I could picture her sitting in the kitchen, the same place where she once told me I was being selfish for not forgiving my ex. Now that same kitchen was gone, taken away along with everything else they had once thought was untouchable. Why are you calling me? I finally asked. My voice was steady, emotionless. She let out a shaky breath. Because we have no one else. No one else. The words hit differently than she probably intended. They weren't just a plea for help. They were an admission. An admission that after everything, they had burned every bridge. They had chosen the wrong side. And now, standing in the wreckage of their choices, they had nowhere to turn but to the daughter they had once discarded. I wanted to ask why. Why did they choose him over me? Why did they ignore my pain, pretend my heartbreak was just an inconvenience? But I already knew the answer. It wasn't about love or even loyalty. It was about control. Keeping the family together, maintaining their idea of how things should be, was more important than seeing the truth. And now the truth had destroyed them. I don't know what you expect me to do, I said. She let out a quiet sob. Please, just talk to your father. Maybe we can figure something out together. Together. As if we were still some united family. As if the past year hadn't happened. I told her I needed time to think and hung up. For the next few days my phone didn't stop buzzing. My father called. His voice flat, more pride than desperation in his tone. He asked if I was really willing to watch my own family suffer. My siblings sent messages, some just checking in, others flat out asking for money. Even my ex, the man who had started all of this, sent me a casual, almost smug text. So are you finally done being dramatic? That text sealed it for me. They still didn't get it. They didn't understand that this wasn't just about money. It wasn't about whether I could help them. It was about whether they deserved my help at all. So I stayed quiet. Days turned into weeks and the messages slowed. Then one day my brother called again. Unlike the last time, he didn't start with small talk or pleasantries. Dad's sick, he said. And it's bad. I froze. It wasn't what I was expecting. I had braced myself for more begging, more manipulation. But this was different. What do you mean sick? I asked. They've been hiding it, he admitted. For months. They didn't want to tell you because they thought it would make them look weak. But it's getting worse and I don't know what to do. I should have felt something, worry, sadness, anger. But all I felt was exhaustion. They need help, he continued. Not just financially. They need you. I ran a hand through my hair, staring at the floor. The part of me that still cared, the part of me that had spent years trying to earn their love, wavered. Despite everything, a part of me still wanted to be the daughter who stepped in, who fixed things. But then I thought of all the nights I cried myself to sleep, all the times I begged them to listen to me, all the ways they made me feel like I was worth less than the man who betrayed me. So I asked the only question that mattered. Did he ever apologize? Silence. My brother let out a slow breath. No, I nodded to myself. That was all I needed to know. They wanted my help, my money, my presence. But they had never once admitted they were wrong. They had never once apologized for what they had done to me. I'll think about it, I said, just like I had before. And just like before, I had no intention of going back. The days dragged on in an uneasy stillness, and the silence between my family and me grew heavier. I could almost feel their frustration radiating through the air, every time I ignored another call or message. I knew they were waiting for me to crack, to give in, to fall back into the role they had so easily cast me in. The fixer. But I wasn't going to be that person anymore. I had let go of the weight of their expectations, the guilt they'd placed on my shoulders. They could drown in the mess they had created. But then something changed. It wasn't just their calls or messages that kept coming. It was the news. Word spread quickly that my father's health had taken a sharp turn for the worse. What had once been manageable had become critical. The doctors didn't give him much time, and I could hear the desperation in my brother's voice when he called again. I don't know what to do, he said, his voice shaking. Dad's asking for you. That was the moment I could no longer pretend like I didn't care. Part of me wanted to tell him that it was too late, that they had made their choices, and now they had to face the consequences. But hearing my brother, the one person I had always felt a bond with, in that much pain, it was hard to ignore. And then I got a call from my ex. I had blocked him, of course, but somehow he managed to get through. I know what you're thinking. His voice dripped with false sweetness, but you need to hear me out. He continued talking, but I barely listened. He was still trying to play the victim. He claimed that he was the one who had been misunderstood, that somehow it was my fault my family had fallen apart. But what struck me wasn't his words, it was the timing. Why was he calling now? Why was he suddenly involved in my family's mess again? Hadn't I already lost everything because of him? It hit me with a sudden clarity. He was trying to weasel his way back into their good graces. He knew exactly how to manipulate them, how to twist their guilt to his advantage. And my family, they would take him back just like they always did. They would beg him for forgiveness, and he would play the hero. He would once again be the one they leaned on, the one they protected. I slammed my phone down, feeling the weight of it all crash down on me. My ex was playing a game, his game, and my family was too blind to see it. They didn't just want help. They wanted to drag me back into their toxic cycle. They wanted me to forgive him, to help them fix the mess they had all created. And suddenly I felt the ground shift beneath me. I wasn't just angry. I was livid. For the first time I realized that it wasn't about me forgiving them. It was about them needing to acknowledge their mistakes. I had spent so long trying to fix their problems, to smooth over their mistakes, that I had lost sight of what mattered. I wanted them to suffer. Not because I was cruel, but because they needed to feel the weight of their choices. They had never faced consequences for their actions. They had always counted on me to make things right. But this time I wasn't going to play their game. I paced the room, thoughts swirling. The call from my brother still echoed in my head. The desperation in his voice was real, and the fact that my father was on his deathbed made it harder to stay strong. But then came the hardest part. I couldn't decide if I was doing this out of spite, out of the years of resentment, or because I truly wanted to see them grow. I wasn't the one who had betrayed them. I wasn't the one who had caused this mess. They were the ones who chose to ignore me. They were the ones who abandoned me when I needed them most. And yet, here they were, reaching out to the very person who had walked away. As the night wore on, the phone calls kept coming. My father's health was worsening, and my family's situation was growing more desperate. I knew this was it. I knew the moment was coming where I had to make a choice, whether to help them, or let them face the destruction of their own making. I didn't know how much longer I could hold out. My emotions were a tangled mess. Guilt gnawed at me, but beneath that was something else, a quiet satisfaction. Maybe I didn't have to save them anymore. Maybe they needed to understand what it felt like to be left behind. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from my brother. "Dad's asking for you." I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his words settling heavily on my chest. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about helping them out of a bind. This was about the broken bond that could never be fixed. It was a reckoning. But would I have the strength to follow through? Would I stand firm in the decision I'd made? Or would I fall back into the old patterns of rescue? The tension was suffocating, and I could feel the storm building. I stared at the screen, my brother's message still blinking back at me, and for a brief moment I thought about it, how I could just let it all go, how easy it would be to step back into the role they had always expected me to play. But then something inside me hardened. I couldn't go back to that life. I couldn't let them drag me into their mess again, not without seeing things for what they were. I set my phone down, taking a deep breath, and turned away from the window. I needed space to think, space to breathe. But as I walked across the room, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated for a second before I opened it. My heart skipped a beat when I saw who was standing there. It was my ex. He looked different, older somehow, but still wearing that same smug smile. He didn't seem surprised to see me. In fact, it was like he had been expecting me to open the door. "I didn't think you'd make it this easy," he said, his voice oozing with that familiar arrogance. I took a step back, trying to control the shock and anger that surged through me. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. "Your family's in deep, aren't they?" he said casually, as if we were just talking about the weather. "They're begging for you to come back, but they need more than just your money this time." I felt my blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" He chuckled, but there was something darker behind his eyes now. "They don't just need you to fix their problems anymore. They need you to save them from the mess I've made." The words didn't hit me right away, but when they did, they hit hard. He wasn't just talking about the financial mess. He was talking about something much worse. He was talking about how he had manipulated my family, how he had wormed his way back into their lives. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was this: he wasn't the one pulling the strings. "You're not the one who's in control here, are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smirked. "You still don't get it, do you? It's not just me they've been depending on. Someone else." I stood frozen, my heart racing as his words sank in. Someone else? Who could be behind this? Who else could my family be involved with after everything I'd been through? Before I could ask him to explain, he pulled out a folder from his bag and tossed it on the table. My hand instinctively reached for it, but something held me back. "There's a name on there that'll surprise you," he said, his voice colder now. "Someone you never thought would be involved. Someone who has been pulling the strings all along." I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the folder, my hand shaking as I flipped through the pages. And there, in black and white, was the name that almost made my heart stop. It was my father's business partner, the one I had never trusted, The one who had always been just a little too charming. The man who had been in the background, pulling strings and making deals with my ex, feeding my family false promises. But the revelation didn't end there. I looked closer. There, in the corner of the page, was another detail I hadn't noticed at first, my own name. Your father's partner. He's been using you as collateral, my ex said, his voice low. Your success, your company, everything you've built? It's been tied to their failures this entire time. They've been gambling with your future without you even knowing it. I felt the floor beneath me tilt. My ex had always been manipulative, but this was something else. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had used me as leverage to control my family, and now my father's business partner was in on it too. The truth I had been running from had come crashing down around me. Why are you telling me this? I asked, barely able to breathe. He leaned in, his face suddenly serious. Because I don't want to be the one holding the bag. I've already lost everything, and now they're coming for you. The weight of his words sank in. My family, the people who had once abandoned me, were now trapped in a web they couldn't escape from. And in the center of it all was me, my name, my business, my life. Everything I had worked for had been used as a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. I stepped back, my mind racing. My ex was right about one thing, I had to make a choice. But now, that choice was no longer just about whether to help them or let them suffer. It was about something much bigger. I wasn't just fighting for my family's approval anymore. I was fighting for my future. And for the first time in years I had to admit it wasn't just about them. It was about me. And I wasn't going to let anyone use me again. The room felt suffocating, my breath shallow as I stared at the folder on the table. My ex had unwittingly given me the final piece of the puzzle. The link between my father's business partner, the web of lies, and the betrayal that had been brewing behind the scenes. I felt a surge of cold rage, the reality of what had happened crashing over me. My life, my success, had been nothing but a pawn in a game I hadn't agreed to play. I was being used, my family's desperation a twisted reflection of their own failures. They hadn't just hurt me. They had let someone else take control of everything I had worked for. I'll deal with it, I said, my voice steady, cold. But not for you. He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, his expression shifting, as if he knew the tide was turning against him. I'm done playing games, I continued, standing tall, feeling a strength I hadn't known I still had. I'll expose everything. My family will learn the truth. I didn't wait for his response. My ex might have been a master manipulator, but I had learned to fight back. I gathered my things, the weight of the folder heavy in my hands as I made my way to the front door. I was done with them, done with him. I had a plan. The next day, I went straight to my father's business partner's office. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked in like I owned the place, my pulse racing but my resolve solid. I could almost taste the victory as I handed the man the folder. He took it, his face paling as he skimmed through it. You think this is going to work? He sneered. You can't just walk in here and... But I didn't let him finish. I know what you've been doing, I said, cutting him off. And I know what you've been doing to my family. You've been pulling the strings, using them as pawns in your little game. But it's over now. His face twisted in frustration, but there was fear there too, fear that hadn't been there before. You're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're getting into. I smirked. I'm getting into my own future. And I'm taking back control. If you want to avoid a full-blown scandal, I suggest you stay out of my way. He narrowed his eyes, his lips pressed into a thin line. You think you can just walk away from this? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I left his office without another word, leaving him to stew in the consequences of his actions. By the time I got back to my apartment, everything was already in motion. I had set up meetings with lawyers, had already begun to take control of my business and assets. The tide had turned. But as the days passed, as I started to breathe easier knowing that I was finally in control, I began to feel the weight of everything I had just unleashed. My father's condition worsened. My family, now realizing just how deep the mess went, tried reaching out again. But this time it was different. They were frantic, desperate, and when I spoke to them, I heard the raw panic in their voices. They knew they were about to lose everything. But the real twist came when I least expected it. A week later, after the dust had started to settle, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but something about it made my heart skip. I opened it carefully, unfolding the thick paper inside. It was a letter from my father's business partner. The letter wasn't just a threat. It was something much darker. I know what you've done, but you have no idea what's coming next. You think you've won, but you've only scratched the surface of the consequences. Your family is already lost, but you're not far behind. You won't be able to escape this. None of you will. I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't over. The letter wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. The final words on the page were chilling. I always get what I want. And I'm not done yet. My heart pounded in my chest as the weight of those words hit me. This man, this person I had underestimated, wasn't just out to destroy my family. He was coming for me, for everything I had built. The war was far from over. The letter sat in front of me, its words etched into my mind, threatening everything I had worked for. I felt a sense of urgency unlike anything before. There was no denying it. This wasn't just about business or family anymore. This was about survival. My ex, the business partner, my entire family. It all came down to the same twisted game, and I was caught in the middle of it. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers. I needed to take control before things spiraled further out of reach. I knew the threats were real, but I wasn't going to let fear rule me again. This time I would be the one calling the shots. I immediately reached out to my lawyer, a woman who had helped me navigate the complexities of my business before. After hearing about the letter and the looming threat, she wasted no time. She arranged a meeting with security consultants and started making plans for further protection, knowing how far these people were willing to go. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still one step behind. It was clear that the business partner wasn't just trying to save face or get revenge. He was working with someone, using whatever leverage he had over me to keep me in check. The game was rigged from the start, and now I was trying to catch up to a plan that had been years in the making. I met with my brother again, and this time the conversation was different. He had reached a breaking point. He confessed how much he regretted the way he had sided with my ex, how he had let me walk away without so much as a second thought. He was angry at himself for falling for the lies, for believing that he could ignore the truth for the sake of family loyalty. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, his voice trembling. But I know I can't keep hiding from it. I've been trying to hold everything together, but I can't do it anymore. This mess. It's bigger than us. For the first time in a long time, I saw my brother for who he really was, a man who had been trapped just like me in a cycle of manipulation and deceit. But what struck me the most was his willingness to change. I realized then that despite everything, there was still hope for us as a family. Together, we started making moves to sever ties with the business partner. We used the legal leverage I had to force his hand, threatening to expose his illicit dealings if he didn't back down. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. I wasn't going to sit back and watch as everything I had built crumble just because of their greed and manipulation. The more we dug into the partner's past, the more dirt we uncovered. It turned out he had been involved in shady deals for years, using my father's business as a front for laundering money. As the pieces fell into place, it became clear that the partner had been playing everyone, including my father. The damage he had done wasn't just to me. It was to the very foundation of our family. Then came the unexpected twist. My ex, the one who had been causing so much pain, contacted me again. This time there was no bravado, no manipulation. He was desperate. He claimed that the business partner was turning on him, that his life was falling apart, and that he needed my help to fix things. "You're the only one who can stop him," he said over the phone, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you don't act fast, we'll all be buried in this mess." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. It was the same game all over again, and I wasn't going to fall for it. He had ruined my life once, and I wasn't going to let him do it again. "I'm done with you," I told him, cutting the conversation short. "Fix your own problems." But that was the moment when I truly realized how much I had changed. I had spent so long trying to fix everyone else's mistakes, trying to play the role of the savior. But now I had no intention of doing that. I wasn't going to carry the weight of their failures on my shoulders anymore. This time I would focus on rebuilding my life, on moving forward. I met with my family again. But this time it wasn't a reunion of apologies or pleas for help. It was a reckoning. My father, weak and frail, listened as I laid out everything I had learned, everything the business partner had done, the secrets he had kept hidden. It wasn't easy to confront him after everything, but I needed him to understand the consequences of his actions. My mother sat silently beside him, her face pale, as she realized the depth of the betrayal. She had always tried to protect us from the harsh truths, but now there was no hiding from the reality. My ex was gone, and my father's legacy was tarnished. But I wasn't going to let it all fall apart. I took control of the company, stepping into the role I had always wanted but never had the chance to fill. I restructured, cutting ties with anyone who had been complicit in the lies, and started the hard work of rebuilding my reputation. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were plenty of battles ahead, but I was ready for them. My brother, now more aligned with my vision, helped me make the changes necessary to move forward. For the first time in years, we were on the same team, working together to undo the damage that had been done. And as for the business partner, he eventually disappeared. Legal action, media exposure, and the fear of being exposed forced him into hiding. No one really knows what happened to him, but one thing was certain. He no longer held any power over me or my family. I sat in my office one evening, staring out the window, taking in the view of the city I had worked so hard to build. It had been a long road, but I had come out stronger on the other side. My life, my success, it was no longer something that could be manipulated or used against me. I had taken it back. The final reflection hit me as I thought about everything I had lost, and everything I had gained. The road to healing wasn't easy, and there were scars that would never fade. But I had learned something valuable. That sometimes the greatest power comes not from helping others fix their mistakes, but from having the strength to walk away from what no longer serves you. It was time to live life on my own terms, and for the first time in a long time I finally felt free.